And I was, my call came as a dream. God spoke to me in a dream and said that you are going to be a pastor and you are going to preach. And I said, no, I'm not, and you can't make me. And so here's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to tell nobody. So what are you going to do now? So I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell anybody for 2 months. After 2 months, I went to my home church in which my associate pastor, by the name of Bud Epple, was preaching. He only preaches like 4 times a year. And he would come, just to make sure that he's got his preaching on at his home church. And then he'd go back to his thing. And he preached on the call. Now, I've been in one of those services where God is speaking to you and nobody else. When God is speaking just to you, you start to shrink into you. You get smaller and smaller and smaller. But here's the other point. After the service, he comes directly to me and says, was that sermon for you? I was broke. God broke me down. It was that point I had to say, okay, if you want me to do this, then you have to make this happen. You are going to have to make this happen. And my minute pastor said, well, why did you go to Calvin Seminary? I ain't go Calvin. Grand Rapids, or more like Bland Rapids. I ain't going there. I ain't going. Well, here's what you do. We'll have to go for a semester, and then if you don't like it, you can always come back home and pick up something. I said, all right. And I told God that. I said, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to Calvin. I'm going to go for a semester and say, I hate it, and come back home. Well, I ended up being here 4 years because God was not affirming, but God was also having other people affirm that. And when I graduated from here in '92, my first was in New Jersey. And I was the pastor who had been there for 36 years, and we were co-cultures. And he taught me more about the calling of pastoral ministry, which is simply this: just be there. And God will teach you more about what it means to be a pastor than everything, all the great stuff that you are learning here. You're going to have to recall that in your 5th and 7th and 10th year, because you be able to use it yet. God saying, save it until the time. And then after that, I was given the call to Roosevelt Park CRC here in Grand Rapids, and have been there for 14 years. The calling came for me as a dramatic way of my preparation. I come to seminary it was very different from Kathy's. I came with my call, and the preparation that I did was there to help equip me. The thing that kept me in there was my call. If it wasn't for my call, I wouldn't be here. I would not have gone through all that I've gone through. But praise God. Sometimes God knows more than what you know. Imagine that. God knows more than what I know and knows more than what we know. And Kathy is absolutely right that your calling is continually being confirmed and reaffirmed. Every relationship and every change and transition. And for me, it is the best life that you can ever have, to be a pastor. That's it.
Well, thank you. And sure we'll draw you out and of different areas. I want to start by asking Kathy a question. Kathy, you obviously have gifts in administration and in pastoral care and in proclamation. And you, as I rough what you do, you're the director of some pretty significant things. What has that been like for you? And what kinds of things do you continually need to discern in those roles? How do you practice the discernment process and the challenges in those roles of being.
I knew early on that I was gifted in, you do the surveys, the gifts surveys, administration and leadership always came up at the top. I was one of those people who had a hard time not leaving. And administration comes easily to me. But one thing that actually I learned from my dad, who was a pastor for a lot of years and then moved into nominational ministry. He talked to me when I graduated from seminary. I think it was on the day of my graduation. He talked to me about his experience as a pastor and what he called a pastoral administrator. And I've thought about that a lot, and I've actually found other people who have been encouraged by that thought, that it is a calling to a different way of pastoring, using the gifts that you've been given. But really what it comes down to, administration isn't just it's not just paperwork. It's not just computer files. It's really about people. And I think if I'd forget that, for one thing, I wouldn't be very good at it, but I also wouldn't enjoy it, and I wouldn't be continuing to feel like a pastor. I would kind of lose that, I think, because, supervising other staff is a relational ministry. To me, teaching and getting to know students is an important ministry, and I hope, of course that's always comes out more from others, but I hope that I could across as a person who loves God and loves people and loves the church, and that in the things that I do, it is a work of pastoring. But it's especially significant in the continuing education. There are a lot of people out there a lot of pastors who don't have pastors. Technically maybe they have a regional pastor or something, but you can come in and even for a weekend be a pastor to someone who has a need then, and you know how God puts those things together. And I was telling Reggie 2 weeks ago, I preached at Northside Chapel in Patterson, and their pastor, Sheila, has been ill for a while, so it was really a neat way to minister to her, both by filling the pulpit for one more Sunday, but spending the week with her in this pastor's class and learning from her and encouraging her and other pastors. So I'm kind of reviewing what I said before, but I don't know if I've quite got at your question.
No, that's good. I appreciate that. And I expect that there are things that you have to discern every day in the role of administrator and course instructor and all the variety of hats that you have.
Well, and let me also add that, in my work in the church, too, in the one church I was in, the pastor left and we had a 2-year vacancy, so, I was it in terms of administration. And all of you are going to deal with administrative things, whether you count it your gift or not. It's going to get stuck on you. But if you see those things as ministry, not as interruptions, the interruptions are the ministry sometimes, right? And some of that stuff, doing things well and making sure things are organized and that people are organized, it really is part of being a good pastor to people. But the people are the point, not the papers.
Yeah,
I really like that for peace.
That term of pastoral administrator. So remember that, those of you who are administrators. Thank you. Reggie, I want to ask you a question. Back in 1993, I felt a clear call from God to pray for the Christian Reformed Church for the next 5 years every day. So I did a variety of things, and one thing was to read the banner from cover to cover, which in the past I had thrown it across the room and said I will never read this again. But one of the articles was about the African-American pastors in the Christian Reformed Church, and at that time I think there were 5. So I wrote to all of them, and I said, I am praying for you, and I had over the years some connection with some of them. A number of them left, but I want to hear you say how you discerned that you should be in the Christian Reformed Church, and clearly God has called you to it. So can you tell us about that and what that's been like?
Oh, Lord. That was a long struggle because when I first came to Calvin, I wasn't quite sure if I was going to even be a pastor in the Christian Reformed Church, because when I came here in '92, I was one of two African Americans here at Calvin. And then when I graduated, I was the second African American to get an MDiv from Calvin. And so, but when I began candidating, I was probably one of the last ones to get a church, because people didn't quite know what to do. They probably think, well, he can't go to Pella, Iowa. He can't go to Bellflower, California. He can't go to Linden, Washington. He definitely ain't going to Thunder Bay, Ontario. It's cold there. I ain't going there. I wasn't quite sure where that was going to go, and was almost was going to join the Presbyterian Church USA in a church in Pittsburgh, until the call came to Northside Chapel in Paterson, New Jersey. It was a long struggle for me until almost about a year ago. I had to embrace that, maybe this is where God wants me to be. And I just had to put the hat on and just wear it. And so I had to come to a sense of comfortableness in saying that, this is where the Lord called me. And, even though that I would love to be in a Black Baptist church with some serious music, alas. But this is still a great church. Yes, it has flaws. Yes, it has fallacies. Yes, we don't do some things right, but there are some things that we do right. And so, you'll probably see my face in the banner when, they have the birth and the death. But, there's a lot that goes on in between those two dates in which you touch people's lives. People remember your sermons. You've made significant ministry happen in spite of you, and the kingdom has been furthered because you embrace your call.
We're very glad you're here. So we're glad God called you to this place. Yeah. Kathy, you already alluded to the fact that you end up doing things that you would never have imagined. I don't know if you ever imagined writing a book, but you did write a book called Stilling the Storm, and I wonder if you could just tell a little bit of the story for that, especially because these people will be pastors, and I think there's great resources in that. So if you could say what the discernment process was like for that call, and some of the fruit of that in your own life as well as to the community.
Okay, just briefly. It came out of the stories of people and churches and, hearing a lot of stories of difficult situations. And with my work with the Worship Institute, they were asking questions, how do we deal with this in worship when we have this huge conflict, or we've had this enormous crisis, or we're going through a transition, a merger, or a building, just all these different things. And so I got my THM here at Calvin too, and in that process did some writing on that subject, which John Whitfleet, unbeknownst to me, sent to the Alvin Institute, and then they offered me a book contract, so it wasn't like something I was looking for. But I said, well, hey, if this can be helpful, if they think this can be helpful, then I'll do it. And it also was my thesis for my THM, so I did double duty. There's a version with more footnotes that wasn't published. But anyway, I think it is being helpful to churches going through these things, and hopefully some folks are, it's sort of a thing you have around for when something happens, and something will happen. I mean, every church goes through something, and just the whole idea, it's a book about how congregations respond to difficult times and then get suggestions for themes and liturgical resources, but it's also a book about how leaders and pastors can manage themselves in difficult times. And,